there's the DHCP state, and then if you're doing web off, there would be a web off state, and then we go into run state, right? And so the association we looked at yesterday, here are the problems, the most common problems we see with associations, and here's how to use debugs to figure out what's going on with the association problems. And we looked at, once you get past association, what were the authentication part of it. And now we're looking at what they call it DHCP required, which is kind of a bad name for it. It's actually DHCP learning. Okay, so that's a better term for it. And what that means is that the DHCP required, we're not requiring the client to pull an IP address from a DHCP server. It could be that the client has a static IP address. What it means is that the WLC is having to learn what that IP address is. And then we either learn that IP address by multiple ways, but two of the ways it can learn it would be, one, if we are pulling by a DHCP server, when the response comes back from the DHCP server, the WLC will basically snoop on that and learn the IP address. If the client is set statically when the client talks, then the WLC will actually learn the IP address, and it puts it in its database. And the reason why it needs to know this, and we talked about this yesterday, was because we don't send ART requests out onto the wireless space. The wireless space is congested enough as it is with beacons and acknowledgments and all your management frames and all your data frames that's going on. The last thing we need to do is start sending ART requests out there. So anytime an ART request comes from the wired network, or even from the wireless network, for a device that's on the wired network, for a device that's on the wireless network, the WLC will respond back, as opposed to the client having to respond back. So within that, when we look at what we call layer 2 issues, or infrastructure issues, basically, there are some issues that we can have. One would be, obviously, if we had DHCP or DNS issues. It could be VLAN issues. It could be power issues. Now, power issues we've never really necessarily had problems with in the past, but with the new APs, the power requirements that they're basically required to run can cause some issues. And we'll talk about what actually happens if we don't supply the right amount of power to an AP like a 3700 series. And then the thing we won't talk about, but if your switch is not figured correctly, then obviously it's not going to matter anyway, right? We can do the wireless side all day long, but if the wired side is not right, then it doesn't matter. So if we look at DHCP and DNS, kind of troubleshooting best practice, the things that we need to make sure of is, one, we need to ensure that the client has the correct path available to the DHCP server. So we need to be able to pull an IP address. And you'll find out there's two ways that we can do that. And I mentioned it briefly yesterday, but the wireless LAN controller can be a bridge, meaning that we're just going to allow the broadcast that's coming from the DHCP, basically discover message that's coming from the client, just to pass through the WLC onto the VLAN that is supposed to be on. Or the WLC can actually be a proxy. And when the WLC is a proxy, what that means is in the interface, we actually tell the WLC the IP address of the DHCP server. So when a request comes in from a SSID that belongs to a certain VLAN, then what the WLC is going to do is going to take that discover message and it's going to unicast it to the IP address of that server. And then that's what you normally see, will see us do. And we'll look at I'll show you again when we look at the debug commands. You can actually tell how the WLC is configured based on when you look at the DHCP required part. It will actually tell you whether or not you're bridging, or it will tell you whether or not you're a proxy. And if you're a proxy, it will tell you what the IP address of the DHCP server is. Just there. So that's one thing that we need to make sure of. Obviously, whoever's responsible for your DHCP server needs to make sure that the parameters are set correctly and that the scope's big enough, right? And that our release time is not causing us a problem where we're exhausting our DHCP pool. Now, this normally happens in very large environments where we have people, guests, coming and going very quickly, right? So, such as a hospital. We have people in a hospital that will walk in, maybe their device pulls an IP address, they stay maybe 30 minutes and they walk out. And so based on how long that lease time is, there is always that possibility that you will exhaust that pool that's there. So a lot of times you'll see the IT group that's over that will set those exhaust times, those lease times, very small. Even though it's requiring the client to go back and basically renew its IP address more, by setting it down a lot smaller, we guarantee that if somebody leaves, they're not leaving with our IP address for a long amount of time, right? So we actually get it back and hand it out again. So that could be an issue with it. It could be a VLAN issue. It could be a VLAN issue with the AP. It could be a VLAN issue with the wireless LAN. It could be a VLAN issue with authentication. So, first thing we have to make sure of is that the AP, so whatever port your AP is plugged into, that it belongs to the right VLAN so that the AP can pull the right IP address if it's pulling an IP address through a DHCP server. So that's one thing. The other thing we have to think about is our wireless LAN, our SSID that we have, actually belongs to a VLAN. And so it could always be that the configuration part of that was wrong, and maybe the client's getting out of the wrong VLAN. And then the third part would be if we're basically sending back VLAN information from a Radius server when somebody authenticates. So when I authenticate, based on who I am, ICE can send back either access control list or VLAN information. And when that information comes back, if somebody configured ICE wrong, then the user might not be able to get to the resources that they should have. So that would be layer 2 type problems that we run into. And then, of course, we need to ensure that DNS entries are made accurate. And that becomes a big issue if you're using DNS, especially for APs to join a WLC, which we'll talk about a couple of lessons later. But basically, there's a way that when a AP goes out to discover all of the WLCs, there are steps that it goes through, which we'll walk through. And the very last step, one of the steps that's in it, is it will actually go out and try to discover Cisco-capout. Whatever your domain is. And so if you don't have that set, and that's the only way you're handing out addresses for the WLCs, and the AP is not on the same subnet as the WLC, then it's not going to run any WLCs. So there has to be a way that we can allow it to discover the WLCs that are out there. And so we'll talk about that. And then last is we'll look at the debug commands that are there that we can use to do troubleshooting here along with what's in prod. So first thing, if you get a failure, somebody's complaining because, hey, I can't get anywhere, I connected up, I can't access anything. If you go into prod and you go into the client and users, so monitoring client and users, and you click on the client, then if you go to the troubleshooting section, here we're kind of following along at the bottom. So we passed association, so we associated, we authenticated, but you can see here that for whatever reason, we now have a problem with the IP assignment that's there. And so we are in this DHCP required state. And again, just keep in mind that it's just a bad term for it, right? It does not mean that we are requiring you necessarily to pull out address. It's more DHCP learning that we're looking at. And there's two ways clients can pull out addresses. I mentioned that there's what's known as proxy enabled and proxy disabled. And this is set in the WLC. And the difference is if proxy is enabled, then what it's going to do is it's going to take the IP address of the DHCP server that is in the interface that the WLAN belongs to, and it proxy the request to basically unicast that request to that DHCP server. If you have proxy disabled, then it's just going to allow that broadcast, that discover message to pass through, and it's not going to be unicast proxy to the DHCP server. And so what that normally means is you're going to have some IP heifer command. Green checks, everybody knows what the IP heifer command is? Green checks, red X's. I got one green check. I got a red X from Chris. Okay, so an IP heifer command, we normally put these on switches, right? So if you think about what happens, I've got multiple subnets in my network, but I don't have a DHCP server on every subnet. I normally have a DHCP server that's in my data center somewhere. Well, the way DHCP works is when a client needs an IP address, it sends out a broadcast. Well, a broadcast, broadcast is not going to transcend layer 3. In other words, it's going to stay local on that subnet, but it's not going to go off that subnet, right? So if my DHCP server is not on that subnet and it's sending a broadcast out, it's not going to find the DHCP server. So what an IP heifer command does is when the switch receives the broadcast, that the DHCP broadcast, that discover message, it actually takes it and will unicast it to the DHCP server. And then the DHCP server will turn around and respond back to that subnet so that the client can get an IP address. That way we don't have to have DHCP servers on every subnet that we've got out there. So if you were going to do proxy disable, where we're just allowing that broadcast through, then you're going to have some mechanism, whether it be the IP heifer command that is on the switches, or you can actually take a server and set a server up to listen for broadcast and send it to actually get it to the DHCP server that's there. So we can see this actually in the debug commands. And so one of the things we can do is we've been looking at this client debug, right? And so we know that when you do the client debug, we're going to see the association come in. So we're going to see this association request. Once we get the association request, we hope to see status 0, which means that we associated. So it's going to say mobile being moved to associated state. We're then going to go through the .1x required part, all right? And keep in mind the .1x required part could either be 802.1x authentication, or if we're using pre-shared key, it could be the 4-way handshake that is being used to determine what the pairwise transit key is and the group transit key. All right, so we're going to go through that. We're going to authenticate, so basically we'll have our authentication that will pass. Then we move into this client DHCP state, or this DHCP required state. All right, and you'll see that what we end up with, if I give me a pointer here. So you'll see that we're going into this DHCP required state. As soon as we do that, we're going into the learn IP address state. So this is where we're saying, okay, we're going to, the WLC is going to learn the IP address of that client, whether it be through snooping on the request or the answer that comes back to the DHCP server, or listening for traffic that's coming from the client and learning it that way. So we're going to go into this learn statements here. And then it will actually start the process. And you can actually follow the process through in this debug. So it's going to tell you that, hey, this is a DHCP discover that's here. It's going to tell you what the address is, and this is a relay, right? So we are actually relaying or proxying this information out. It also gives you your information such as what's the client MAC address, did the client have an IP address beforehand and it's trying to renew that IP address, the WI address is your address, or the address that's been handed out, the SI address is server address. So it's going to tell you what all these addresses are, And you can follow this process through. So we're going to have basically a discover that happens. You'll then see that, hey, here is the offer that's coming back. And the offer is coming from server 192.168.0.21. And then it's offering this 192.168.50.101 IP address. Just there. The client would then send out a request. So we get this discover, we get an offer, it comes back, and the request goes back to the server that says, yeah, I want that IP address, give me that IP address. And then the very last thing that will happen is an acknowledgement will come back from the server that says, you have that address. And then once we see that, then you'll see this basically changing state to WebAuth required, provided we're doing WebAuth. And then you will see at the very bottom assigning address 192.168.50.101 to mobile. And then as soon as you see that assigning address, you know that you have completed the DHCP part of this. And then once you complete the DHCP part, if you're not using WebAuth, you're going to go to run state at that point, and you're going to be good to go. If you were going to WebAuth, then it would actually put you into the WebAuth state, and then you could actually watch the flow of the client being redirected to the web page and logging in. Now, it's possible that you could get back, let's see here, the question is who's deciding WebAuth info and why DHCP is involved in that? Okay, so two questions. Who's deciding the WebAuth info and why is DHCP involved in it? So first thing, let me answer the DHCP part. So when we talk about WebAuth, basically what we're talking about is more or less guest services where somebody's hitting a web page and they're going to log in with either a username and password, or we're just going to do basically what we call a hotspot, which means that we're just going to make you accept an AUP, and then once you accept the AUP, then I'm going to allow you to have access to the network. You have to have an IP address before you can access a website, right? So that part has to take place first. You will always pull an IP address first before you ever hit the website to log into. Now, who decides the WebAuth info? WebAuth info as in username and password, or WebAuth info as in what the website looks like? Login. Okay. So it depends on how you're doing it. If you're using the username, if you're using the web page that's in the WLC, which I'm guessing it is probably what you guys are doing now since you're just now implementing ICE, then you have something called a sponsor. It's a lobby administrator. And anybody can be a lobby administrator. And a lobby administrator basically has rights to log into a WLC and make username and passwords. They don't have full access to the whole WLC. It's just when they log in, the only thing they get access to is the ability to make username and passwords. When you guys go completely to ICE, my guess is that if you guys use a web page for guest services, that's going to be served up through the ICE server. And when it's served up through the ICE server, the person making the username and passwords is basically what's known as a sponsor. So all Cisco did was change the name of it. It does the exact same thing then. So what that means is a sponsor can actually hit a web page that is on ICE, and the only thing it gives them the ability to do is to make a username and password. And you can set it up so that they can only make one username and password. They can make 50 at a time. They could pull, and there's a lot of things we can do with it, right? So it kind of depends on the organization. A lot of times, organizations will not require their guests to have username and passwords. What they do is they do a hotspot, right? And so the guest hits the guest network, kind of like Starbucks, right? You go into Starbucks, you log in, you get this pop-up page that makes you agree to an AUP, And then as soon as you agree to that AUP, you have access to the network or to the internet. And that's easy because, what we're concerned with is we want to make sure that the user is agreeing to an AUP. Now, the AUP doesn't mean they can't do anything wrong, but it means that at least we've got them agreeing that they won't do anything bad, right? If you've got where you want to have username and passwords, then a lot of times you'll have a lobby person that will make them. So whoever's the lobby person at the front of your office, when somebody comes in, they can go in and make a username and password. A lot of times they give everybody access, or they might give managers, right? So somebody's coming in to visit you that's in sales. You might have to go to your manager and say, look, I need a username and password for this person for this day. And then they can go in and make it. So it's done a lot of different ways. Did that help, Mohammed?
Actually, my question, let me rephrase. Why does this thing come in the WebAuth question comes in between the DHCP request? What does similarity it has with it, or reliance?
So what happens is the WebAuth comes between DHCP and run, right? Because if you think about it, run state means that you have authenticated, you have passed everything, and you have access to the internet or whatever, right? But to access a web page, you have to have an IP address. So so normally what will happen here, and let me go back a couple of pages. To here. All right, so if we were going to do WebAuth, what we would see would be this. And this is normal WebAuth. So let me get out a pen. I don't think that's what I want. Let's see. So, the normal WebAuth, what we would see is you would not have this thing.
How are you?
Because we're not requiring any 802.1x. We're not requiring any pre-shared key ahead of time. So what the client would actually do is the client would actually send out an association request. So an association request would go out to the AP. The AP is going to send back an association response. In other words, we're going to associate you. At that point, as soon as that happens, the client will pull an IP address. When the client pulls an IP address, it then gets basically diverted to the web page to log in with. Once they log in with their username and password, or they log in, basically they just accept the AUP, depending on if we're using a hotspot, then they go into run state. So we have to have an IP address first. Then we can access the web page. Then we have access to the internet or wherever we're going to go. But normally you won't have this 802.1x required. That will be a WebAuth type of authentication. Does that help?
But that message was coming in the, if I heard it or something, I did not see it, that the message about the WebAuth was coming in the DHCP debugs, that it needs a WebAuth before it goes into a run state. Or maybe I misunderstood.
That was very static. I didn't catch a whole bunch of that.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood, but I thought the WebAuth requirement message was coming in the DHCP debugs. Is that correct?
Oh, it comes after the DHCP debugs.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's why I was confused. Why is DHCP like the DHCP debugs? Okay, maybe I misunderstood then. Never mind.
Yeah, it comes after. So basically, what you're going to see is if you go to debug, you're going to see the association after that, it falls in the run state. Okay, other questions? Oh, you're welcome. If you just want to look at DHCP, right, then what happens is you can run a thing called debug DHCP message table, and it actually just shows you the messages that are going back and forth. So it shows you a couple of things. It shows you the message type. So you'll notice here that, let's see if we got it. Here is my DHCP discover. That's right there. That's going back. Here is my DHCP offer. And then it also shows you any option content. So things such as net mask that's there. It also shows you things like if you're doing like option 61, what the requested IP address was, and any of these other options. If you're using any of those options that are in there, you can see the messages that are going back and forth, and you can see the option information that's in those messages. So it's a little bit cleaner, basically, if you want to think of it that way, as opposed to maybe running the debug client things there. If you need to see more detailed information than just the messages, you can do debug DHCP packet, and then what that's going to do is that's going to actually show you the information that's actually in each packet. So now we're going to see things such as is it cross. We're going to see the DHCP server that's being used, the gateway address, information, along with all the other information, IP address, and everything's coming back. So it's going to give you individual packet information. You can see this is what a debug DHCP packet would look like, and this looks pretty much very similar to what you see in your debug client, right? So you're going to see the DHCP received a boot request. Here's the DHCP selected relay, so that means we're .1.1, and you're going to see each step within the process of that. Basically, all based on what is it you're wanting to see. You're just wanting to see the messages and make sure the messages are making it back and forth with the options that are in it. You actually want to see everything that's actually inside. You guys, green text, you guys can still see the slide. lines, right? But so that would be DHCP issues. If it's VLAN issues, normally the two biggest places I normally see issues with VLAN is one, if you're doing VLAN with authentication, in other words, when I authenticate, I got ICE that's going to send back what VLAN I belong to. A lot of times that can get messed up, right? Because the whoever set it up in ICE maybe set up the wrong VLAN. The other place that we normally see issues is, if you remember, what happens here is this. Let me see if I can draw this. Okay. So we have an AP. And we'll say this is a switch. And we got our WLC. And so what will happen here is normally what you'll see is that the connection between your switch and your AP, this is basically a access port, right? Because the only thing we really need, since CapWAP is going between the AP and the WLC, we just need to make sure that whatever VLAN that AP is connected to is going to be the AP VLAN. You know, the VLAN that the AP needs to pull its IP address off of. But between the WLC and the switch, this has to be a trunk. And it has to be a trunk because if I've got multiple SSIDs out here, then I might have, an SSID called guest. I'll just put a G. And that might be on VLAN 20. And I might have a SSID called internal. And this is on VLAN 30. And so from the AP, I can change colors. From the AP to the WLC, this is CapWAP. So we don't really worry about the VLAN. All that information is inside that CapWAP. Once you get to the WLC is responsible for stripping off all the CapWAP, stripping off, basically taking that able to allow any VLAN. They normally lock the VLANs down.
So you're working today, huh? Yeah. Every day.
And it could be something very similar where somebody goes into the WLC and maybe makes a change to a VLAN, or maybe they added a wireless LAN and they add, to a VLAN, and then it never gets added to that trunk. So maybe we're allowing VLANs 20 and 10, but we're not allowing VLANs 30. So it will actually get to the WLC, but it will never get out of the WLC. And so we see that issue a lot.
Okay, so that's the one you want to separate.
Yes.
Okay, then the other one, you want me to leave it here or take it?
No, that's all that thing. One is the one to live on.
Okay, so you keep everything?
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me while I blow my nose. So that's normally the VLAN issue, and there's not really anything. The only thing you can do there to troubleshoot is if you look at the show clients, show client details, then what it actually gives you is it will actually tell you what VLAN that client belongs to. And so you can determine, if you know what VLAN they're supposed to belong to, you can determine from that. If they're on the right VLAN and they're still not getting that. Then it's just a matter of troubleshooting it all the way back to determine that you're not getting it out of the WLC because the trunk is not set up for that specific VLAN. Is not allowing that specific VLAN. The other issue that we have at layer 2, besides DHCP or infrastructure, besides DHCP and VLANs, is PoE type issues. And PoE type issues have, especially with the new 802.11 AC type of access points, this is really becoming a problem because of how much PoE your switch will actually provide, right? So if we think about the kind of the progression of PoE, so we started out, we had inline power, which was that was Cisco, and that was about 7 watts. That was Cisco proprietary. Then we had a standard that came out, which was IEEE 802.3AF. And that standard basically provided 15 watts PoE per port. Right? Then Cisco came out with 30 watts around 2007. 2009, IEEE actually came out with their standard for 30 watts, which was 802.3 AT standard. And then now Cisco is out with 60 watts. And they're out with 60 watts because if you think about it, more and more stuff today is being, especially with the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, and more and more stuff is being powered over PoE. So whether it is the Cisco communication, those monitors that have this monitor, video, everything all in one, I think a lot of those can be powered by PoE, but we're needing more than the 15 watts or 30 watts that are out there. The other thing that you're